Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast, where we talk to customers and experts about how to create products and services that feel like time well spent. And now, here are your hosts, experienced strategists, Dave Norton and Aranza Savas.
Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast. I'm Aranza Savas.
And I'm Dave Norton.
And Dave, we are joined today by none other than legendary hotelier Chip Conley. So you might have heard of one of Chip's most recent ventures, Airbnb, this tiny little startup that he joined a decade ago after a successful career as a boutique hotel company founder and CEO. And when Chip joined Airbnb, he was twice the age of the average Airbnb employee. So he was given the title Airbnb's modern elder. And you'll hear him describe, I think, on the show what that really meant to him. And as the internal mentor to Brian Chesky, who was this fresh young CEO at Airbnb, Chip really got to understand at a deep level the value of intergenerational collaboration. And with his new venture, which we'll make sure to have him tell us about, the Modern Elder Academy, he's looking at a new psychographic, a new customer through very different lenses than I think historically we have ascribed to the midlife years. Chip is a pioneer in the experience economy in so many ways, and we are thrilled to have him join us today. Well, Chip, if you couldn't tell from my intro, I'm kind of a fan, and I'm pretty excited to be here with you today and to have this conversation. And Dave will finally get to stop hearing me say, "Oh, we're going to talk to Chip next." So thank you for being here today. We're so happy to get your thoughts.
Sure. Honored. I mean, I love collaborating with bright, creative people who think differently. And that's what we're going to do for the next half hour.
Pretty exciting. A few things I enjoy more. And, I'm really sort of wowed when I think about the ways that you have shaped certainly the travel industry, but in the work that you're doing now, how people think about organizations and frankly, how they think about experiences. So as somebody who has been what we would now label an experience strategist for a really long time, and as somebody who's seen and done what you've seen and done, I'm curious what you believe the future holds for the experience economy.
Well, certainly there has been a lot talked about moving from the experience economy to the transformational economy. I think we'll probably talk about that today. I mean, so my history on when it comes to experience design and being a chief experience officer has really started with the boutique hotel business, which was an industry that was disrupting traditional hotels, generally because of the combination of the design and the service experience. And then after 24 years of being CEO of the second largest boutique hotel company in the US, I joined Airbnb after selling the hotel company and spent, that was a long time ago, over 10 years ago. I joined Airbnb when they were a tiny little startup and said, like, okay, how do we democratize hospitality and how do we create a unique experience that is going to be wholly different than a hotel experience, but still oriented toward the travelers of the world. And then more recently, my experience with the Modern Elder Academy, founding that, has been really taking this to a deeper level. Yes, transformational travel is a thing, but that's part of the business that we're in. But the idea of a midlife wisdom school, a place dedicated to helping people move toward a transformation that will actually alter their second half of their adult life, that's the business we're in now. So that's taking experience 3 steps higher in terms of expectation. And it's also more expensive than Airbnb or a hotel experience. So we better deliver on that.
What do you believe is most important to successfully fulfilling the promises you make?
I think, well, first of all, I'm a big believer in Peak, a book I wrote a bunch of years ago, 15 years ago now, how great companies get their mojo from Maslow. So I believe that there's like a hierarchy of needs for every customer, no matter what industry, whatever kind of business you're in. The baseline, the survival need is meet my expectations, please. The next level is the success need of a customer, which is meet my desires. And then at the top of the pyramid is meet my unrecognized needs. But to be honest with you, a customer doesn't even understand their unrecognized needs. So that's why the best companies in the world are those that understand that you got to get the expectations right and deliver on those, as well as understand desires. But as Steve Jobs famously said, I'm never going to learn a whole lot about transforming the needs of a customer by doing a focus group. And that's partly because he really believed that understanding your customer so well that you could actually deliver the thing that they didn't even ask for is part of your job if you're an experienced designer. And so I love that at MEA, at the Modern Elder Academy, the thing we hear all the time is, oh my God, this is after the fact. This was the workshop I didn't know I needed. Now, of course, they signed up for it, so they were looking for something, but what they got was something else. And in essence, I would say they were getting something at the top of the pyramid, and something that was going to be transformational. In our case, something that built a deep sense of community and some social wellness around how do you make change in your life and do so with feeling like someone's got your back, a group of people have your back, because they're actually going through a bunch of changes themselves as well. Mm-hmm. So I would say the customer pyramid from Peak is my model for imagining how do you deliver on expectations and more.
I remember when Peak came out, I was really impressed with the work that you were doing, and it was a major departure in some ways from where you kind of started, and I think that's really interesting to kind of to explore a little bit. One of the first things that I learned from you was a little technique that you used for designing your boutique hotels, where you would take magazines, and they were, and I'll tell you after, maybe you can tell this story, but I'll tell you why this is so interesting to me. But could you talk a little bit about the role that magazines played in the design of your hotels?
Yes. Thanks for the question. And the experience economy guys they loved this thing. Joe and
Jim.
And Jim. Thank you.
It's all the alliteration.
Joe and Jim really appreciated it as well. So my first hotel was a broken down 1950s motel, a no-tell motel, no less. It had hourly rates in the Tenderloin of San Francisco. It had failure written all over it. It was in bankruptcy. And when I brought my team together after we bought the property and we were going to renovate it and turn it into a new name, new product, we all had a very different perspective on what this thing was supposed to be. So for the next meeting at age 26, mind you, I was a youngster, I said, bring to the next meeting a magazine that sort of defines the personality of this hotel we're going to create. And it was really interesting because at the next meeting, 7 of us were there, and 4 of the 7 brought Rolling Stone magazine, and which meant that we had more in common than we thought we did. And so from that point forward, every one of the 52 boutique hotels we created was based upon a magazine or 2, a hybrid, and 5 adjectives. So that first hotel, which is now called the Phoenix 36 years later, that hotel was based upon Rolling Stone. The 5 adjectives were funky, adventurous, cool, and young at heart. So everything we did in creating that hotel came back to those 5 adjectives: the kind of restaurant, the kind of staff, the kind of services, the kind of decor. But the magic that really was a beautiful epiphany one day was when we came to realize that the people who fell in love with the hotel saw the hotel as almost like a mirror for their aspirations. So it's almost like the people who fell in love with the hotel had a psychographic of being funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart. So what we were really doing was, we were not in the boutique hotel business. We were in the identity refreshment business. Mm-hmm. Our job was to create hotels that had a unique, soulful flavor to them that could be, could be represented by the statement, "You are where you sleep." And that's, frankly, that was a huge reckoning, and it frankly was our biggest differentiator as a boutique hotel company.
Yeah, and Arances, one of the things that I love so much about that particular story, first of all, what a brilliant idea. Joe and Jim would refer to that particular idea. Yeah, I know, it seems really simple, but Joe and Jim would refer to that as a theme. They would talk about the theming of each one of the Joie de Vivre hotels. Yeah. Since then, I have come to think about what you were doing as creating a point of view about, and you did it kind of instinctively, but you creating a point of view about what the customer would want. And why they would want it, that then permeated the entire design. And you created a separate point of view for each one of those hotels. And to me, one of the lodestars of experience strategy is, do you have a point of view on what the customer will want? And you did, just by channeling those magazines. I look back at it and I think it's one of the most brilliant moments in kind of experience strategy history, because you really tapped into what the customer was about. And I don't think very many people realize that's what was happening. That's what you were doing.
Well, I think there's 2 pieces to the magic that I want to let's go behind the curtain and talk about, why does the magic work. The first piece of magic is that the fact that boutique hotels have a lot in common with magazines helps. So boutique hotels are niche oriented and lifestyle oriented, just like magazines are. So it was not a bad corollary, or not a bad sort of way to get to the answer. The second piece is what I talked about earlier. At the top of the pyramid is meeting unrecognized needs. If you don't have a deep and abiding understanding of the psychographic of the person you're going after, how will you ever come up with their unrecognized needs? So once we knew, for example, Hotel Vitale in San Francisco was real simple meets dwell, and the 5 adjectives were modern, urbane, fresh, natural, and nurturing, we knew that by creating a 400 square foot yoga studio, small yoga studio with a spectacular view and its own deck on the top floor of the building, and having free yoga classes in the morning in a financial district hotel 20 years ago, that made sense for that customer. Our investors looked at me like, what are you doing? Nobody has a business hotel that actually is taking its best real estate and giving it to a free yoga class every morning. And but as it turns out, someone who's modern, urbane, fresh, natural, and nurturing, and think of business women travelers in particular, because most business hotels at that time 20 years ago were built for business men. It became a huge hit overnight. And I can't say that the yoga studio alone was why it did, but there was a line out the door for the classes, the free classes. But I think what it did is it helped the customer feel like, you get me. You get me. And I'll never forget the email I got from a woman from Manhattan who came to the Vitale twice a month for 5 days each time. And she said in the subject headline, she said, "Thank you for creating Hotel Juliana. And I was like, Hotel Juliana? We don't have a Hotel Juliana. And then I read the email. I was like, you created the hotel that was perfect for me. And when someone says they've created that one-to-one product for them, you got it right. And so that's, yes, thank you for the applause. It is a simple idea, but you also then have to execute on it exceptionally well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I just love that story. I think it's so great.
It's interesting too that boutique hotels as a category have outlasted magazines as a category at this point.
Sadly.
That's crazy.
So what do you use now as your comp, as your inspiration to understand? Because I think what you're doing now to me seems even more challenging because frankly, elders have been so devalued in our civilization for hundreds of years. And we have not carved out a place for them to be emulated and to be aspirational.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and let me come back to why it's even called the Modern Elder Academy. So at Airbnb, when I joined, they started calling me the Modern Elder and someone who's as curious as they are wise. When I heard Modern Elder, I was like, what are you talking about? I'm 52 years old. I'm not elderly. And they said, well, no, but you're an elder because you're twice the age of the average person here. And I was like, okay, that's true, but are you being ageist? And they said, no, a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. And that when I heard that, I was like, okay, if that's what a modern elder is, I will be a modern elder. And what came to pass was as I spent more time talking to my contemporaries in their 50s, I just heard more and more people being fearful of being irrelevant. So the elder of the past was regarded with reverence, but the elder of the present, if they get it right, it's all about relevance, not reverence. So I started to think about like, why don't we create a place that helps people feel the midlife chrysalis, not the midlife crisis. So let me explain that for a moment. So, midlife crisis, midlife is the worst life stage when it comes to a brand. It has one word attached to it, and I just said it, the crisis. And the U-curve of happiness social science research has pretty conclusively shown that yes, between 45 and 50, although your mileage may vary, between 45 and 50, that's the low point in life satisfaction during all of adulthood. Although it does show that with each passing decade after age 50, you get happier and happier. So that's a whole different subject if you want to go into it. So as I started to look at this and peel it back and realize that, yeah, I had a really rough period between 45 and 49. And then my 50s, I'm 62 now. My 50s were by far my favorite decade. I started to look at the research on what really is happening during midlife. And that's when I started to realize that, the caterpillar to butterfly journey, where midlife is the chrysalis, speaks a lot to what is going on here. The fact is that, yes, a lot of transitions are going on in midlife, and you're having to maybe look at your expectations and rejigger them. And you often have a lot of spinning plates. But yes, the chrysalis is gooey and dark, but on the other side of it is transformation. And there's so much evidence out there that people, if they invest in this era of their life, they come out of it on the other side in a really transformed and more free state, which is part of the reason why, life satisfaction grows from age 50 on. But we have so little in the way of society programs to help support people in midlife. I mean, we have adolescence is a thing, but that word didn't exist before 1904. And midolescence is a thing that's now 20 years old, but only sociologists talk about it. But midolescence is the adult corollary to adolescence. It's when you're going through hormonal, emotional, physical, and identity transitions. But we don't have career counselors or guidance counselors or parents or schools for midlifers. And so I guess I wanted to create the world's first midlife wisdom school dedicated to that, partly also because I lost 5 male friends age 42 to 52 to suicide during the Great Recession of 2008 to 2010. Yeah.
I do believe that there is there is a tremendous amount of energy right now around this topic. And are you sensing a shift in the conversation?
For sure. I mean, we have over 3,000 alumni from 42 countries who've come down here to a little rural fishing and farming village in southern Baja, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas, to come through our program. I mean, we don't have a big advertising budget, so what we have is an NPS score of over 90 for people who've come to the week-long program. So there's like, and for those who don't know, NPS is Net Promoter Score. It's and you could have a score from negative 100 to 100. So Four Seasons is around a 72, and Apple's around a 74, and the fact we're in the low to mid 90s means that something serious is happening. And so I think there's a huge need. So I'm excited. I'm working on a couple new books that are going to be on the topic of learning to love midlife and maybe rebranding midlife, helping people to understand, like, okay, what if midlife, instead of being sort of like the start of the long, slow decline, the midlife is like the reset button time of your life when, and whether it's Richard Rohr, famous Christian mystic, or Carl Jung, or Becca Levy's work at Yale about if you shift your mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, you gain 7.5 years of life. We have taken all of this and collaborated with all kinds of academics to create a curriculum that is dedicated to helping people understand what is midlife for and what can it offer to you if you do it the right way.
Yeah, I think too in healthcare, we're seeing a big shift in spend, and startups seem to really be exploding, especially in the healthcare space, and especially for women. Historically, there's like the idea of women in midlife and their healthcare needs just hasn't even been touched. But more and more, I think we're seeing an expansion of awareness around that, and a reevaluation and a revaluing of this moment in a person's life. So I do think that what we're probably seeing right now, and I know you've been at this for a while, this didn't just happen yesterday, but I feel like, again, there's a good chance you were in the early days of something that will be a huge game changer for a category.
I love, to be a category creator. So being an early boutique hotelier, really the third after Ian Schrager and Bill Kimpton in the US, and then Airbnb, and then this is a combination of midlife wisdom schools as a thing, but also our alumni just love their experience. They said, well, why don't you create like communities? No one wants to live in a retirement community someday. Why don't you create regenerative communities? And the average age of our people is 54, so it's not like they're ready for a retirement community anyways. But the idea of living in a community around a regenerative farm, and you have a community potluck every Saturday night, and there's a meditation class in the morning for free, and so we have one of those that's opening up here in Baja, and we'll have a few opening up in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Gosh.
So.
I'm going to put my vision, though, that the next stage of this be multi-generational. My 14-year-old, I grew up in a multi-generational home. I raised my children in a multi-generational home. My children, all they want is they're like, I don't understand. I'm going to have to go live on my own. Can't I go live with some old people?
Yeah.
Because they're,
are you
I'm just thrilled.
My husband is, but I'm a Texan, and I have good genes. So the women in my family live to 100. So we just have a lot of women around.
I got to say, I'm just thrilled to hear that Chip Conley's getting back into built spaces again. We need spaces built by Chip Conley. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And not exactly the thing to be doing when interest rates are this high. What's that?
Well, yeah, I know there's always a big challenge, but you have done such a lot of great work for built spaces, and the fact that you're combining that with transformation, which I know, Aransas, this is so near and dear to your heart. This is what you're focusing on a lot in your practice as well, is helping people to make that transition at a critical time. This is exactly what we need. And there's so many different places where we need this type of work. I won't be surprised when you sell it for billions of dollars at some place along the time.
I just hope lots of copycats come along and that you have a huge amount of competition, frankly.
Right.
So, Francis, that is exactly what I'm looking to do. I have been a for-profit entrepreneur with Joie de Vivre and with Airbnb, both mission-led, but definitely for-profit. This one is a social entrepreneur thing, and my intention here is not to look for the consumer need, but to look for the society need. And in so doing, what I deeply want to do is to be a catalyst for others to create midlife wisdom schools, regenerative communities. On the midlife wisdom school thing, like just this week, 3 different colleges and universities in the U.S. have said that they're closing. What's his name? Clay Christensen said in 2013 that in the next 10 to 15 years, 50% of the colleges and universities in the U.S. will close. And that was pre-COVID, of course, in 2013. And so we live in an era where we are going to have to figure out, number one is, what do you do with all these old college campuses? Number 2 is, what do you do with all these not yet old modern elders who are, let's say, 50 years old? And what if we, sometimes cultural change takes a little while. Sometimes it happens quickly. But what if 10 years from now, everybody looked back and said, of course, someone should take a gap year in their 50s, at age 50, let's say, and they take a year off to sort of reimagine what's next? Because our average age of people coming to MEA is 54. They, on average, think they're going to live till age 90. Do the math. 54 is exactly halfway between 18 and 90. So it's half your adult life is still ahead of you at age 54. Now, a lot of us don't think that way. And then when we do think that way, we say, oh, geez, like I'm going to be old really long. But that's actually not the case. You're going to actually be in midlife really long. And then you're going to have an elderly period when you're reliant on other people. And yes, it's not going to be your best era, but that doesn't last that long. So this is a really important.
Can I tell a story?
Yes, please.
All right.
Are we going to talk about your gap year, Dave?
I've got to tell you. Well, yeah, I've been on my gap year this year. That's for sure. But I was in this little town called Palmyra, New York, about 4 or 5 years ago, and there was a gentleman there. He was 92 years old, and I struck up a conversation with him. And he clearly had his daughter there. She was in her 70s or something like that, and I struck up a conversation with him. I wanted to know what this little town was about because he lived there his entire life. And so he started telling me stories about Palmyra and what was going on. And at a certain point, I asked him a question. I said, "Did you ever farm when you lived here?" And he said, he just kind of looked at me, shook his head, and he said, "I quit farming when I was 50. I mean, he only wanted to talk about the second half of his life. He didn't really want to talk about the first half of his life. He had had so many experiences since then. Those were the things that he wanted to talk about.
Absolutely. We joke in our family because my grandmother's 93. She still runs every day. She practices yoga every day. And my aunt and my mother are super active and wildly impressive. But the joke is that you don't get to be an old person in our family till you hit 90 because we treat our 75-year-olds like children and, or like young adults. And the only one that gets any passes or pampering is grandma. And so it is all a matter of perspective too, right? Because in other families at 75, these women would be the old people. But it's how we behave, how we interact with our age.
One of the questions we ask, our program is based upon the idea of how do you set up conversations set up the crucible for life-changing conversations that are really appropriate for this particular era of life. One of the many questions that we ask is this one: what is it that you know now or have done now that you wish you'd done or learned 10 years ago? And once you've got that in your mind, then ask this more important question. 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't go do it or learn it now? And that is a really important question. It's part of the reason I learned how to start surfing at age 57, how I learned to start speaking Spanish at age 58, because I knew, man, I live in Mexico part-time. I live near a very famous surf break. That will be harder 10 years from now. So I think helping people to feel the anticipated regret, this is a form of wisdom. So we're a wisdom school. So we really focus on wisdom. We define wisdom as metabolized experience that leads to distilled compassion. And that is what we try to help people to understand. How do you cultivate and harvest that? So yeah, I love it. I feel very lucky to have found my next calling.
It's incredible. I'm really grateful that you have. And I think the regret approach is quite smart. I did some work with Diet Bet years ago, and we did a number of different tests around getting people to engage in healthy behaviors on a consistent basis. And the most motivating driver was regret. And so we ended up implementing all these regret lotteries, and you could turn out, kind of get people to do anything if they're afraid they might miss out. So it was really interesting how powerful that is in our psyche.
Yes.
But I think too, if we don't believe we will have the potential to regret, we start to assume that death is around the corner, right? So I think one of my big insights lately has been the realization that there is this pervasive belief that it's too late to change. Mm-hmm. And I think we see it and hear it everywhere. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is one of our core pillars of our program is Carol Dweck's work from Stanford on mindset. Yeah. And how do you shift from a fixed to a growth mindset? And helping people to do that opens up all kinds of possibilities and options. And it also helps them to see that they have a lot of life ahead of them. But part of it is helping people to learn it's okay to be a beginner again. Because it was okay to be a beginner when you're an adolescent because you're a beginner on so many things. But in your 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe later, to become a beginner again there's so many different internal and external influences that tell you that's not a good idea. So we help people to understand what's a good decision around being open to becoming a beginner and what's a bad one. I mean, learning how to surf at 92 probably is not a good idea. But at 72, actually, literally, we had somebody just a few weeks ago. He's been to MEA 7 times now. He's from Texas, San Antonio. And he actually, on his 7th visit, finally at age 80, decided to learn to surf. And it was so beautiful to watch him and how he was such a giddy little kid when he came back on shore after he'd gotten up, because we have surf instructors and they help you. But, we don't do that at the start of the week. At the start of our workshop week, if you said to everybody, who's going to go out and try to learn how to surf, like 3 hands out of 24 people would raise their hands. But by the end of the week, 16 or 17 people are actually out there on a surfboard.
That's incredible.
That's one of the
taught Grandma how to paddleboard last year. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I remember seeing that on Instagram. That was hilarious. I'm not hilarious. That was beautiful. But it's interesting. One of the things that you just pointed out is that once people begin to change or to commit to change, within a week, you've got them doing stuff that they never thought they could possibly do at levels that are much higher. Do you think that as we move into a transformation economy, that's going to be the model that's going to happen where people are going to say, I want to change, and the company is going to know, not only am I going to help you with this change, but I'm going to help you do something that you didn't even imagine could be possible. And, are we going to be doing that? Because that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, I think there's 2 pieces to this. One is the catalyst. How do you design experiences that become the catalyst for change that could lead to transformation? And then there's the second piece, which has been a very big part of MEA as well, which is, and then how do you actually help guide that change maker, that person who wants to make the change in their life, in such a way that they don't feel like they have the classic, oh, that was amazing. Oh, no. Did that happen? Was I there a month ago? Was I there? So our alumni program and 26 regional chapters around the world and all of the things we've done to try to help people to land softly and safely but still catalyzed by their community is an important part of it. And that's for me. I for 10 years I was on the board of the Esalen Institute, the most famous personal growth retreat center in the U.S., and I used to teach there as well. But I was always shocked by the fact I love Esalen, and I was shocked that at the end of a workshop there was nothing other than if you want to go to the Esalen Facebook page or something like that. There wasn't an alumni program. There wasn't anything that sort of helped you to keep it going. And so I think that's a really important part of it. It's also obviously a good business model to have people continuing to be part of your community.
Right. Well, and for your mission, which is to have greater cultural impact, to create a safe and courageous space inside your bubble is powerful, yes. But if there is no safe and courageous space outside the bubble, then there can be no ripples. Yes, I can see that Joe has come back to Houston different, but if Joe doesn't have the safe and courageous space to continue his exploration and transformation, then I'm not going to believe it's possible still. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very important part of our metrics of what we evaluate is not just, the NPS, an exceptional NPS when people leave, but 6 months later, 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, where are they? How engaged are people still in the alumni community, et cetera?
How do you measure that out of curiosity? Since all of our listeners are experienced strategists, it's something I think that really challenges experience-led organizations. I'm a big fan of felt shift metrics. So I imagine you're employing some of that. But beyond NPS, what are you looking at?
Well, we look at so many different things. So what are the ways we keep track of engagement and level of depth of transformation? Everything from, we have an alumni directory. So we keep track of like how many people are on the alumni directory, how active are they, how are people actively involved in regional chapters. So we have 26 regional chapters. Well, this last year, 2022, 225 regional chapter events happened around the world with our alumni organizing all of them. So we have regional chapter leads who are alums, but nobody's paid. So those are some things. Then we have, reunions. We have the digital engagement elements, but we ask questions, every 2 years. So we've been around for 5 years now. Every 2 years we do a really in-depth dive with all of our alumni to understand both qualitatively and quantitatively how did they keep it going, and what were the tools that actually kept it going. We have a subscription program, so people can actually pay a monthly subscription to sort of be part of deeper work. But for some people that they don't want to do that, what they want to do is just make, as one guy says, I think of you as my tune-up for my car once a year. So I just come down and once a year I do a program, and in so doing, I'm making an investment in my transformation. So I would just say that it's a variety of things, probably too many things that we do. But the ultimate determinant is 85% of the people who come to MEA come because an alumni suggested they come. So we spend almost no money on advertising.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's always a really good fantastic sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of these experienced strategists who are listening to us, I mean, I could talk about aging and intergenerational communities all day, and Dave could talk about transformational experiences all day with you. But for these folks who are listening, we always try to crystallize a few sort of universal takeaways that we think can be valuable, no matter what industry folks are in.
Yep.
So what would you say to them?
Well, I'd start with the pyramid. Because I think the peak pyramid we talked about earlier, expectations, desires, unrecognized needs, pretty important. You can do that in any industry. Secondly, I would look at within your organization, how do you have, if you're in the service industry in particular, how do your line level service team have a voice in the crafting of your products? I think it's really important, and it's at each of the businesses I've been involved in a leadership capacity. I've really wanted to tap into what I can learn from them. Additionally, we have a rule at each of these 3 businesses I've been involved in. It's called fresh eyes. So usually after 30 days or 90 days in a new job with a company, you have a probationary period, which is such a terrible term. And during that probation, you get a review, like, here's how you're doing. It should be exactly the opposite. After 30 days or 90 days.
How are we doing?
That person who's new, they have fresh eyes. So we call it the fresh eyes program. So the fresh eyes, you come in, you're now new in the company. Why do we do things this way? They're that way. Before your fresh eyes are no longer fresh eyes, tell us what we're doing wrong. Tell us the missed opportunities. Tell us, because if you've been a customer of ours, tell us how we can serve you and other people like you better. And that's a huge opportunity that most companies don't do. I mean, they just do the opposite, which is so stupid. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Yes, you do need to do reviews of people, but after 30 or 90 days, yes, you need to give some direction. But man, there's so much more for the enterprise that's valuable in terms of listening to that person. Because actually, quite frankly, listening to that person may give you the early clue that they're on the path to disengagement, which is, and guess what? If you give them, if they're already if they don't like things and they're disengaged, and instead of doing fresh eyes, you come to them and say, here's what you're doing wrong. That is a prescription for short-termitis in terms of your employee pool.
I have a new summary in my mind of the theme I hear in your work, which is that you celebrate diverse perspectives. So,
Yep.
Right, whether in terms of longevity with an organization, longevity in the world, or even different cultural perspectives, really that does seem to be, at least in this moment, to me, it seems like the through line in all of this.
I mean, I was lucky that in high school, I went to an inner city LA high school where they called me the curious white boy, because it was by far a predominantly non-white school. And I think I learned at an early age, like, wow, what does it mean to be the other? And then I happened to be gay. And at 22, after having played college water polo at Stanford and being in a fraternity, I came out as a gay man, which was hard for sure. And, marked me as a potentially someone who was never going to be a CEO of a company. But I learned the diversity of what it means to be gay. And then, Airbnb, I definitely learned what it meant to be old and yet celebrated for it, not because of reverence, but because of relevance. And so, I may not look like somebody who would naturally have some perspective on diversity, but I got to say, I've had a good fortune to be the diverse other 3 different times in my life that has helped me to better understand the value of diversity.
Yeah. And you listened, importantly. Right. There are many ways to respond to that. And, in the same way that I think, to your point earlier, we should celebrate awkwardness and learning at every stage of our lives. We should celebrate newness and discovery. We should celebrate learning in this way as well, and listening. So, Dave, anything you want to add in terms of
I don't think I can add anything to what Chip has said. And Arantes, I love where you went with that. I had one additional thought. It's not a summary thought, but I think about the companies that we work with who are interested in behavior change with their customers. And oftentimes what they're trying to do is get their customers not to overdraft their checking accounts, to spend a little bit more on things that are higher quality. The thought
you mean higher value by that, I think,
higher value or higher quality or whatever. And the thought that runs through my mind, having gone through this now, is that overdrafting is a symptom of something larger. And what CHIP is doing is providing a framework for people to transform themselves so that these little things that make life so miserable, we can address in an appropriate way by transforming the larger aspects of our lives. And so going through a midlife crisis is one of those little things that can be transformed, or a big thing. So it's a thought for a podcast in and of itself. So I'll just stop there and suggest that these larger transformations are going to positively impact other smaller aspects of our lives as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, I'm just, as you say that, I'm thinking about the power of shifting our perspective still, and how we can see any of these moments as opportunities full of possibility and potential, or we can see them as endings. And I think what we learned from your career, Chip, is that with each ending, you have created a new beginning, really, where maybe people didn't know something could be born. So I'm excited to see what you do in your 70s.
I still got 8 years, so be patient.
Well, I'm just saying, it seems like every 20 years or so, we get a new innovation from you. So I'm curious to see what'll happen next. Absolutely. Thank you, Chip. Thank you to all of you who have been listening to us, who have been with us on this journey for the past year and a half as we have explored the potential for this show to meet the needs of experienced strategists and help you expand your perspective. So please keep telling us what you want to hear more of and what you're interested in discovering. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for listening to the Experience Strategy Podcast. If you're having fun nerding out with us, please follow and share wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Find more episodes and continue the conversation with us at experiencestrategypodcast.com.